In Okala, a land situated in the heart of southeastern Nigeria, where the earth met the sky with endless stretches of green, there were tales whispered in the winds about men of great power. Legends were told of warriors whose strength seemed endless, whose bravery inspired awe, and whose presence commanded respect. Such men were not only the protectors of their villages but also the ones who stirred the hearts of the young maidens. They were not merely sought after, they were adored, desired, and revered. The very sight of them could make the heart flutter and the breath catch in the chest. Obi was one such man, a giant among men, who, with every passing day, became more of a legend. His name was spoken in reverence, his strength admired by all, and his courage in battle unmatched. The maidens in the village watched him with eyes full of longing, their hearts racing at the thought of being the one he would choose. They dreamed of being the woman by his side, the one who would share his strength and his life. But Obi, despite his fame, remained untouched by their advances. Obi's reputation had been built over many years, starting from the very first time he had stepped into the arena of battle. When the village's farmlands were threatened by a massive tiger that had killed several animals, Obi had been the one who stepped forward. Armed with nothing but his spear and sheer courage, he ventured into the jungle, where the beast roamed. The tiger, a creature with eyes like burning coals and claws as sharp as daggers, seemed unstoppable. But Obi, with his heart full of determination, faced it head-on. He fought with such ferocity that the very earth seemed to tremble beneath their struggle. After a grueling battle, Obi emerged victorious, the mighty tiger lying still at his feet. Another time, Obi was called to the village river, where a snake of enormous size had wrapped itself around the banks, its fangs dripping with venom. The maidens had gathered at the river to fetch water, and the sight of the creature had sent them running in fear. But Obi, with his calm and focused demeanor, strode into the waters. His voice echoed through the trees as he chanted a chant of strength. The snake lunged, but Obi was faster, his spear striking with deadly precision. The snake was vanquished, its slithering body now motionless in the river. Not only did Obi possess incredible strength in battle, but he was also known as the best farmer in the entire village. His yam barns, towering and laden with golden yams, were the envy of all. His plantations stretched for miles, their crops lush and plentiful. The villagers marveled at how one man could cultivate such abundance, and his name became synonymous with prosperity. He was a symbol of hard work and dedication, a man whose efforts brought wealth to the village. The maidens of the village were captivated by him. They had seen him fight the tiger, defeat the serpent, and tend to his fields with unmatched skill. To them, Obi was the very embodiment of strength and beauty. His broad shoulders, sculpted chest, and strong arms, his every movement seemed to possess an almost divine power. His deep voice, which echoed like the rumble of thunder, made their hearts race. They would gather at the village square, waiting for a glimpse of him. When he would pass by, they would greet him with wide smiles, their voices laced with excitement. To receive a smile or a word of acknowledgement from Obi was a moment of pure bliss. For many of the young women, it was the highlight of their day. Even the older women, who had long been married, found themselves whispering about him with admiration. In their desperation to win his heart, some mothers would cook elaborate meals, spicy pepper soups, roasted plantains, and bowls of steaming yam porridge, each dish meticulously prepared with the hope that it would win Obi's favor. They would send their daughters to Obi's hut, their baskets heavy with food, their eyes full of expectation. Along with the food, they would offer him bottles of palm wine, hoping that with each sip, Obi would come to see the beauty of their daughters and choose one of them. But Obi, unmoved by the temptations of food and wine, never showed interest. He would thank them kindly for their offerings, but his eyes would never linger longer than necessary. The envy among the young men in the village grew with each passing day. They couldn't understand why Obi, a man blessed with everything, strength, wealth, and the adoration of the women, would reject all the offers presented to him. They couldn't comprehend how one man could hold such power and yet remain untouched by the charms of the women who pursued him relentlessly. Obi's strength and wisdom didn't come from the praises of others, nor did they come solely from his natural gift. They had been forged in the fires of hardship. Born to parents who died when he was a mere infant, Obi was raised by his grandmother, a woman of deep wisdom and strength. From a young age, he heard stories of his father, a warrior whose feats had earned him great renown. His father had fought for his people, protecting them from danger, and had built a name that was spoken with great respect. Obi, even as a boy, had longed to be like him, to grow into a man whose name would be remembered, whose strength would be unchallenged. His grandmother, ever the wise woman, took it upon herself to raise Obi with the lessons of the past. She taught him the ways of the land, the importance of hard work, and the value of wisdom over brute force. Strength is not just in the arm, Obi, she would say. It is in the heart, in the mind. A warrior is one who uses all parts of himself to protect what is his. When Obi's grandmother passed away, Obi inherited the small hut and the modest farmland she had maintained. It was a humble beginning, but Obi's determination and discipline soon transformed that land into a thriving enterprise. His yams, which were once few and small, now grew in abundance. His plantations stretched farther than anyone else's, and the villagers spoke of Obi's skill in farming as much as they spoke of his prowess in battle. But for all his wealth, strength, and admiration, Obi remained alone. The maidens of the village sought him, but none captured his heart. He did not desire their beauty, their food, or their gifts. He had seen too many of their smiles filled with ulterior motives. No, Obi had his own heart to guard. And it was in guarding that heart that he discovered his greatest strength. In the village of Okala, there was one name that remained unspoken among the other young maidens, a name that carried with it the weight of scorn and pity. Ada. To the villagers, Ada was not a beauty, nor was she the daughter of any wealthy family. In a village where appearances often defined a person's value, Ada was easily overlooked. She was an orphan, raised by the village but never truly accepted, and she carried with her the marks of hardship. Ada had lost both her parents when she was still a baby. Her mother had passed away from an illness, and her father, a hardworking man, had died shortly after in an accident at the river. Raised by her grandmother, Ada was taught to be strong, just as Obi had been. However, unlike Obi's legacy of strength and renown, Ada's was one of silence and struggle. Her hair, unkempt and often tangled, was a stark contrast to the neatly braided hairstyles of the other young women. Her clothes were simple, made from fabric her grandmother could afford, far from the fine clothes that the other girls wore. While the young maidens of Okala adorned themselves in jewelry, necklaces made from pearls, bangles that clinked when they walked, Ada had none. Her family's poverty was evident in every part of her appearance. Yet, despite all this, there was a quiet strength in Ada, one that few people could see, and even fewer respected. The other maidens would often laugh at her. They would snicker as she walked by, making cruel comments about her unruly hair or her lack of proper clothing. When Ada entered the village square to fetch water from the stream, the girls would huddle together, whispering behind her back, their eyes full of disdain. Ada, with her head down, never retorted. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best defense. But there was one person in Okala who noticed Ada in a way no one else did. Obi. Obi had spent many of his free hours by the village river, playing his flute. The sound of the flute would drift through the air, its soft melody carrying across the water. To the maidens, it was a melody of allure, something that would tug at their hearts and invite them to approach him. They would gather on the riverbank, their eyes locked on Obi, waiting for him to acknowledge them. But it wasn't the maidens who caught Obi's attention on that day, it was Ada. She arrived at the river with a heavy clay pot balanced on her head, her bare feet carrying her gracefully along the well-worn path. As she bent to fill her pot, the other young women near her began to laugh, pointing at the wild tangles in Ada's hair. Their cruel words echoed across the water, but Ada kept her head down, silently ignoring them. Obi watched from his spot by the riverbank. He had seen how the maidens of Okala treated Ada, and something stirred in his chest. The scorn they showed Ada seemed unfair. He knew what it was like to be misunderstood, to carry the weight of expectations without ever being seen for who you truly were. And Ada, in that moment, was a reflection of that. He stood up, his large frame casting a shadow over the water. His footsteps were silent as he approached Ada. "The water's heavy today," Obi said, his voice gentle but commanding. Ada turned, startled by the sudden presence of Obi, the mighty warrior. She lowered her gaze quickly, unsure of how to respond. I'm fine," she muttered softly, not wanting to draw attention to herself. But Obi wasn't looking at her with the same eyes as the other men in the village. He didn't look at her with pity or disdain. Instead, he looked at her with quiet understanding. "You shouldn't have to carry that alone," Obi said. He took the clay pot from her head without asking and began to fill it with water. Ada stood in silence, not sure how to respond to the kindness. The other maidens, watching from a distance, gasped in shock. This was the great Obi, the man every woman in Okala dreamed of, the man who had rejected every offer of love, and yet here he was, speaking to Ada. They watched in disbelief, wondering what could have drawn his attention to the girl who had always been laughed at. As Obi filled the pot, he caught the gaze of the other maidens, who stood frozen, staring at him with wide eyes. He gave them a small nod, acknowledging their presence, before turning back to Ada. "Come," he said quietly. "I carry this for you." For the first time, Ada felt a warmth in her chest that wasn't born of embarrassment or shame. Obi wasn't making fun of her. He wasn't seeing her as the others saw her, he was simply being kind. And that, more than anything, made her heart beat faster. From that day on, Obi found himself drawn to Ada. He would visit her as she walked in the fields, her hands callous from labor, but her movements graceful as she walked the land. She wasn't like the other young women of Okala. She didn't seek attention, nor did she care for the lavish gifts of the men. She was focused, determined, and kind-hearted. Ada, too, began to look forward to Obi's visits. His presence brought her a sense of peace that she had never known before. No longer did she feel like the girl who was invisible to the village. With Obi, she felt seen, understood, and respected. It was not just his strength that she admired, it was his character, the way he treated others with kindness and humility. The more time they spent together, the stronger their bond grew. Obi's thoughts, once consumed by the admiration of the maidens, began to shift. He began to notice the quiet beauty in Ada, the way her smile lit up her face, the kindness in her eyes, the strength in her heart that no one else could see. He was no longer interested in the allure of the other maidens, whose attention had once seemed like the most important thing. Ada had captured something far more precious, his heart. As the days passed, Obi found himself thinking of her even when she wasn't around. He would play his flute by the river, the melody flowing through the air as he remembered their conversations and the way she had looked at him with trust and gratitude. Ada, too, found herself thinking of Obi. She hadn't expected to feel this way, so connected to someone, so cared for. It was as though something inside her had awakened, something she had never known existed. But even as their friendship blossomed, there were others in Okala who watched with growing jealousy. The other maidens, who had longed for Obi's attention, saw their dreams slipping away as Obi's heart seemed to turn toward Ada. And they would stop at nothing to win him back, even if it meant tearing Ada's life apart. As Obi and Ada's bond grew stronger, so did the envy and resentment of the other maidens. They could no longer ignore the deep connection that was blossoming between them, and it infuriated them. The quiet, humble girl, who had always been dismissed, the one who could never attract attention no matter how much she tried, now had the attention of the most powerful man in the village. The whispers started to grow louder, carried on the winds that rustled through the trees of Okala. The maidens had always been the stars of the village. They were sought after, admired, and admired again. Their beauty and grace were what made them valuable in the eyes of the village men. And they were certain that Obi, the mighty warrior and the most sought-after man in Okala, would never look at someone like Ada. But here he was, spending his days with her, laughing and talking, his gaze always soft when he looked at her. The maidens could not understand it. What was it about Ada that made Obi see her? What could she possibly have that they didn't? The jealousy in their hearts simmered, and before long, it began to boil over. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over Okala, the maidens gathered in secret behind the village square.